Yeah, I don't know either.
Still doesn't seem to be working. Ah, no. What are we doing wrong?
Ah, there we go, we're live.
Are we?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know either.
Okay. Yeah, we are.
Okay. Okay. Apologies for the delay, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, we had to figure out some technical stuff as this is our first stream on YouTube. Welcome. We're gonna review some hands that were sent to us by the members. I'm Alexandra. I've been playing poker for around 3 years now, mainly playing 200, 500 on GG. Yeah, I've been streaming some poker as well. And yeah, that's pretty much about me, Paul.
Yeah, so same sort of story, been playing for the last 3 years, currently coaching for Run It Once. And yeah, currently playing between 100 to 500 now. Hopefully over the next few months, going to be dropping out more of the 100 games and pushing on to 500. So yeah, let's jump into some hands, I suppose, and see how we do.
Okay, let's do that. So here there's a 2.2 cutoff open. I don't really know who these villains are because it is anonymous. Also, it was a GG hand, so don't know much about that. And we get called by big blind. We flop a straight, and our hero goes for a half pot c-bet, which I think it's obviously fine, but I think we need to remember this is not a board that we can c-bet very often, and we should probably also mix in some check back with this hand. I don't know, any other thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, so one thing I'll just keep in mind here when we get to a flop like this is that villain is going to connect with this board quite often. So being in the big blind, they're not going to be 3-betting all of their Jack 10, so they're going to have some Jack 10 off, as well as Jack 10 suited. They're going to have some connection in 7s, 8s, and 9s, 7, 8, and 8, 9, as well as 5, 6. So yeah, I imagine something around a half pot sizing seems good, and mixing in checks as well. I think mixing in checks with a hand like this could be good, because there's going to be some runouts here that we're not going to be able to get 3 streets on. So any 10, any jack, club turns as well are going to be difficult for us to continue getting value. So maybe a hand like this might be better getting value on later streets and protecting the check back range as well. Against some opponents who are massively going to overprobe on the turn, I think that would be a really good idea with this hand.
Do you have any reads from who's on this hand? Any thoughts on the villain, I think?
So we were sent some information, but there's nothing on the flop here. We're just up against a passive reg, so keep that in mind as we move through this hand.
Yeah, right. Maybe that means he's not going to pro bluff very often, so we might lean more toward the c-bet. Anyway, I guess this is fine, and we do face a check raise. In terms of straights here, what I would say on the flop is that a passive rag, especially on GG, I don't think they will 3-bet too many Jack 10 suited from the big blind. So if we think about it, he's probably gonna have over 12 combos of Jack 10 because there are like 12 offsuit combos. Then the suited ones he doesn't 3-bet. 10-6 could also be in his range. So there's a lot of combos that beat us already. And yeah, also a lot of combos that have equity against us. On the flop, facing a check raise, our hero calls. I don't really see here any point in 3-betting. Don't really see. I think this is just a standard play. Any other thoughts on the flop?
No, one thing I would just keep in mind is anytime that someone we face a different action. So when someone calls, obviously their range is going to be filtered, and when someone check raises, their range is going to be filtered. So in this spot, we do have a straight, but something I see like lower stakes players make the mistake of, and even higher stakes sometimes, is just not understanding where their hand lies in a range. So here, I think we should just like immediately pay attention that our hand is it's not as strong as it looked on the flop before we got check raised. We're going to be behind a bunch of hands, things like 10-6, Jack 10, and villain is going to be check raising with high equity hands as well. So we're expecting to see some club draws and some straight draws as well.
Yeah, exactly. And we need to keep in mind that we need to revalidate, especially against the passive rag. If even if the turn and river is a blank, and he keeps barreling, shoving the river, it's already quite a tough spot if your reads are correct and you know for sure this guy is pretty passive. We go for a call. There's a queen bringing a double flush draw, and villain now goes for a 3/4 size. Any thoughts on this?
So the turn is a blank in a way. It does improve some of his semi bluffs on the flop in that he picks up um, some of the backdoor flushes now improved slightly. They're going to have a little bit more equity, but it's pretty much a blank in that it doesn't change the strength of hands. In that Jack 10 was already a straight. If he was check raising with a hand like pocket sevens or pocket eights, it's not as if those have improved. So his value range on the flop is still going to be pretty much the same on the turn. So yeah, I would just keep that in mind. I think we have a call against this size. If we were facing an overbet size, it becomes a lot more grim. But I think we do still have to continue here on the turn. But it's not a great prospect on a lot of rivers.
Okay, let's see what he does. I actually do agree with your thoughts. I think this hand is doing quite well already. We are beating a lot of value hands, so I think it's far from saying this is a bluff catcher at this point. But it's also not close to the top of our range. I think if I had here something like a stand with a flush draw, I might be a bit happier. But that being said, against the 3/4, when we still beat quite a lot of value, I don't think we could fold. And yeah, I think the play here is to call. Our hero shoves though. Did he send us any thoughts on this hand?
I just want to go back over what you said just to highlight that. In that we were talking about the Jack 10s that beat us on the flop and on the turn, but yeah, people are gonna be check racing with hands like sets and combo draws. So even though we're not in a great position with 5-6, we are still ahead of some value hands that are going to take this line. We never want to be folding turn. But yeah, once we face a continue on the turn, I don't think I would be shoving a hand like this. So we did have some notes from the guy who gave us this hand, and he said, I assumed that our reg won't bluff on the river, and there's still enough hands that I beat, hands like sets and there's a bunch of hands that I need to design equity from, such as combo draws. So I thought the best thing to do is shove on the turn. However, I didn't realize he could have at least 16 combos of straights in Jack 10 and 10-6, and also don't think he's 3-betting Jack 10 suited in his position very often. So I think that this is too weak. I think this hand is too weak to take this line. Maybe call turn and evaluate river. So I would agree with his thought process after the fact. So I think this is just a standard call on the turn, and we get to evaluate river. But yeah, I wouldn't go jamming here. I think it's a bit of an overplay with our hand.
Yeah. In terms of his thoughts, though, I think they are quite valid in the sense that, yeah, there are a lot of hands that we do need to deny equity from, and we do still beat some hands. But in terms of the SPR, this is just too big shove to put in here, especially considering how many hands are ahead of us. So yeah, just call against this size, much better play. But he did shove and he calls. There's a king and he runs into Jack 10.
Yeah, something to keep in mind here. If we ignore the turn shove and we call on river, is we are obviously going to be shown very often a value hand, but we just need to keep in mind on the river when we're facing a check raise, a bet on the turn, and jam on the river. We don't always we're going to lose more than we win. We're facing facing a shove, sometimes we're just getting the correct pot odds if we think that villain has enough bluffs. If we think that this guy is a very passive reg, then maybe sometimes we can go for more nittier folds. But yeah, just something to keep in mind, because I know some players at lower stakes sometimes avoid making calls that are in theory winning calls, just because they're more often going to see better hands than they are worse hands, and they sort of ignore pot odds.
Yeah, I think I do agree. Although, if we were to call turn here, I think the river shove would still be an overbet. And against the passive rag, I think we could, depending how passive he is, but I think we could also find a fold with this hand. I think what we'd have to think of is if our hand is a bluff catcher.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think it's quite tough to say, at the point where we are not sure and we could still beat some value and he could still have some bluffs. It's probably a call by the river, I would say, but it's not a happy call. And if you know the guy's like really passive, like 42 women's off flop, 5% flop check raise, then I would tend towards a fold. But mostly, I think I'm calling river.
Yeah, again, I think once we're on river, we just have to recognize that we have to evaluate the range that we're going to be facing. So, we would think that we're going to be up against mostly Jack 10 and 10-6, and then bluffs. I don't think that worse than 5-6 would be jamming here, although we would also chop with 5-6 sometimes. And then obviously just evaluate if we think he can have enough bluffs and chops in order to make the correct call on the river, given pot odds. Yeah. Because again, we might not have faced the shove on the river. We might have just faced a large bet. So.
Yeah, we always need to think of pot odds, and I think a good way to think of bluff catching on the river is thinking, what is his worst value hand here, and how many combos, approximately at least, of value hands he could have, and then try to count how many bluffs he can find. Another good guideline is if you have an info or if you did mass database analysis to check the lines, how overbluffed, underbluffed they are against regulars. That's also a good way to go. People were asking about stakes in this hand. Let's see if we can see. Yeah, this was played at 200 NL.
Okay. Jump on to another
one. This is 50 NL. Not really sure what format and what site.
So this is 50 NL on PokerStars.
Right, and our hero asked us to keep his name anonymous, and we are going to do that. So hijack MP, however you want to call it, opens to 2.5 big blinds, and he goes for a call with Jack 7 suited. This hand, although it might seem good to play and pretty standard defend, I think we always need to take into account the rake structure. And if you play in a high rake environment, as I assume 50 and Alon Stars is, not really sure what the rake is, then I think it becomes a really marginal defend, at least against hijack. Any thoughts on pre-flop, Paul?
Yeah, so just the same as you, really. Our hero said that pre-flop I call Jack 7 suited pre-flop, which I think is standard. I'm not sure if you've got GTO Wizard up, or if you can just quickly pull it up. But if we look at pre-flop, some pre-flop solutions, I think even if you look at a 500 NL solution here, I think Jack 7 suited is going to be very close. I think it may even just be a fold pre-flop, and that's at 500 NL. Rake structure. So if we're playing in a rake structure such as 50 NL on stars, the rake is going to be higher, and so pre-flop we need to be tighter with our continues.
Yeah, let's check. This is NL50 against 2.5x, and hijack opens. Big blind to decide. And yeah, this seems to be always a fold, and even Jack 8 is mixing. So yeah, just to show how much the rake can make an impact on this. Let's pick some other ranges. Let's say we're playing 500 NL now. Again, 2.5x. Oops. Okay, now you see in a 500 NL rake structure, Jack 7, interestingly, still not a call, but we do start calling a bit more, and I assume if we make it really high stakes, then it's probably pure calling.
Yeah, I think something to just keep in mind here is obviously the open range that we're facing, the open size that we're facing, and then obviously rake. Because if a player would have opened to 2 big blinds here, I think Jack 7 suited is probably a defend. But given that he's open to 2.5 big blinds here from MP, I think it is going to be, well, as you can see, it's supposed to be a fold pre-flop. But let's just have a look quickly against the 2x. So yeah, as you can see, guys, like when someone is opening smaller, we can obviously continue much more because the pot odds we're facing pre-flop improved versus same range or from similar range. So yeah, if someone's opening 2 big blinds here, Jack 7 suited is a standard call, but you have to be very aware of how sensitive these ranges are versus different sizes under these rake structures.
Yeah, so I think it's good, just not to go on autopilot and have a chart and think, I know this is a defend from big blind, I know this is not a defend, because you see even from 2x to 2.5x, there's very big differences, but maybe someone goes 3x and you start calling Jack 5 suited or similar hands, and in those spots you can lose quite a lot of EV because they also happen quite frequently. So yeah, this is something to really pay attention to.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we head to the flop, and Hero said, I call the flop c-bet, which I think is standard. I think I am behind all value bets, but I beat a lot of bluffs and semi-bluffs. Thoughts?
Yeah, what I would say about this is, villain bets half pot, that's true, and it probably indicates he doesn't go for a range bet, but I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, I would say, to think that we don't beat any value bets. I think for half pot here, I mean, it's quite a good board for him, and when he picks this size, I think he could still bet hands like 10, maybe ace 9, and other hands like that. So although yes, our hand is not very strong and it is behind most value bets, we do beat some. I think calling is quite a standard play. It's a bit too weak to check raise, obviously way too strong to turn into a bluff, so I think we call. But I would, just add that he does beat some value bets in my opinion.
Yeah, I think something to keep in mind here is I imagine MP could probably end up betting close to his range for half pot here. And if you look at the solve, you may see something like that. Obviously, when we're playing against humans, I think it's always worthwhile keeping in mind what our opponent does. So if we've seen him range bet or uses the 3% sizing on a different board, and now he uses the half pot sizing, maybe his range changes slightly and he's using different sizes for different portions of his range. So I think it's good to just keep in mind, as our hero did here, that we're facing a bigger size and not just a 33% size.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you made, and I think it's super underrated, just taking notes and paying attention to what your opponent does. Obviously, it depends where you play. Maybe it's not that relevant if you play big zoom fields or if you just play super big fields or obviously anonymous fields. But if you face the same players every day, I think it's important to, take note on what they're doing and their bet sizings and so on.
Yeah. Okay, so we call, and then what show the action, and then I'll go through. Okay, so our hero said, facing a large bet, I decide to fold. This is standard for me, but I wanted to check if it was okay. I think these larger turn bets, particularly from earlier positions, usually mean strength. I think all value bets beat me. I think the jack and the 9 hit my pre-flop calling range pretty hard, so I don't see too many 2-barrel bluffs. Having said all this, I think my hand is pretty high in my range, and there are a lot of bluffs that I can have. So whilst I would usually fold here without thinking, looking back, I think it might be better to call.
Mm. Yeah, interesting thought process. I think it's good to, to observe we're facing quite a big bet. But yeah, I don't really agree that it's hard to find two barrel bluffs here, because if you think of his range, opening from MP, his range is condensed towards bigger cards, so Broadways and so on. And here, all of those have gut shots and overs. There's Queen 10, which is an open ender, a lot of flash draws, even stuff like Ace 4, Ace 5, low suited connectors. If he opens that, like 5 6, 5 4, those are also draws. And I think it's quite easy to find a bunch of bluffs here. And if we think about our hand, I think the 7's quite good, because he's not always going to open stuff like 7 8. I don't think we block a lot of bluffs with it. And yeah, exploitatively, what I would say is I think a lot of lower stakes players just tend to double barrel and not follow up on the river with bluffs. Because of this, all this, I think it might actually be a call. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you make some good points there. Like keeping in mind just how many bluffs someone can potentially have on this board, as you said, those ace four, ace fives, four fives, five sixes. You've got queen 10, 10 8, king queen, king 10. All of these are really natural bluffs to continue on the turn, and villain only has so many value bets. So it's potential if he's betted, all of his draws or a lot of his draws, that he could potentially be over bluffing this spot. And something I think just to keep in mind here when you're thinking about calling, if you think that this villain is generally going to be tighter, and we're going to be wanting to make the best decisions we can on turn to lead us into the river, I think calling with a hand like Jack 7 is going to be better than calling with a hand, say, like Jack 8. And the reason I think that is because on a river 7 we have high implied odds, where if we had a hand like Jack 8 and the river is an 8, that now makes some of villains' hands, such as Queen 10, which is a really natural continue on this turn. So if I was looking to fold a top pair here, I think I would rather choose something like Jack 8, which blocks bluffs and has bad implied odds, as opposed to Jack 7, which doesn't block any bluffs and can actually make a strong two pair on the river.
Yeah, I agree with your thoughts. Anything I don't know, any other thoughts about the sizing? Because I just noticed this is not, to me, it looks like a, made up size. Doesn't look like he just pressed the hotkey, unless he has really weird hotkeys, which, you never know. But yeah, seems like a scrolled up size or scrolled down size. Do you think this could be a kind of sizing towel?
Yeah, again, I think keeping in mind that on the flop he didn't go for a 33 or he didn't go for a 75, he went for the half pot sizing. And then on the turn here, he goes for this, what is it, 85 or 90% sizing. It's not, as you say, it's not like a button pressed size. So maybe he's gone 75 and then scrolled up to 9, or maybe he's clicked pot and he scrolled down to 9. Again, it can indicate strength sometimes. But not always, there are a lot of bluffs that can potentially do this. But one thing to keep in mind here is if we made the call on the turn and we got to river and we saw a bluff, then we can make note of his flop and turn sizings with a bluff hand. And if we see that again in a future hand, that could be like a really valuable note that we can use to exploit the tendencies of our real life opponents. Because again, we're not looking to play perfectly against a solver, we're looking to play perfectly against an opponent. And if an opponent is exploitatively choosing different sizes on the turn, and he's not doing that in a balanced way, then we can make a lot of EV by noticing that. And conversely, if we got to the river and we faced another value bet and we called, we might see that this was a value hand. And again, just making that note that with a value hand, you use this sort of sizing, because in the future, if he uses a 75% or an overbet sizing, it could indicate that he's using a different portion of his range.
Yeah, I do agree with your thoughts. I would add that maybe I don't think I would call the river very often, unless I do have some reads, because from what I see in pool analysis, this is, if you face button versus big blind and there's a wide range, people do tend to overbluff, but in tighter range spots they they tend to slow down a bit and not have as many bluffs. So yeah, I would keep that in mind. But on the turn, I do agree. I think this should mostly be a call. Should we go to the next hand then?
Yeah, for sure.
Now we face two big blind open, and our hero calls from the big blind. Pre-flop here, it's quite interesting if you actually look at some charts against two big blinds open. We should be very passive. And that is because, first of all, we get really good odds to call, and then there's not as much money to be won pre-flop by 3-betting. So here, yeah, there's a player missing, so we are actually facing MP. But I wouldn't be surprised if we call high frequency, even queens here, jacks, tens, ace king. So yeah, our 3-bet frequency goes down a bit when we face smaller sizing. Any thoughts on pre-flop, or does Hero have any?
Let me just double check. So yeah, just said again, I call a6 suited pre-flop, which I think is standard. So yeah, this time I do think it's a standard call.
Yeah, pretty much. I think some suited ace-x do mix in some 3-bets, but overall quite low frequency.
Okay, so we see a 2-3-7 flop, and we face an almost pot-sized bet. So our hero said, I think my... so our hero called here, and then he said, I think my flop call is just bad. I thought I have some showdown value. However, he can have better ace highs, so I should maybe ignore my showdown value and instead go for a raise. The reasons are, one, although I do have some showdown value with ace high, I am beaten by better ace high. Two, I have some fold equity, even though villain's big bet implies I have less fold equity than usual. Three, I am happy to call or shove if villain re-raises. And then four, there are a lot of turn cards I can barrel on to get overpairs to fold, or I might hit one of my outs. Thoughts?
Yeah, interesting. I do agree with some of those, and I disagree with others. So first thing I noticed in his thought process is he says he thinks he has some showdown value, but he could be beat by better ace highs. What I would say about this board is I think it's relatively intuitive for most players that this is not an extremely good board for them, as in position, I mean. So when I see this size here, I tend to, be quite cautious, because I don't think, it doesn't look like a player who studied solvers and has a really balanced strategy here. So yeah, I think this is very likely a sizing tell, and I would tend to be quite cautious. This means I don't want to have a lot of check raises. Second thing he said about his showdown value and being beat by better ace highs, I'm not sure how true that is, because I don't really expect him to put a lot of ace highs in this sizing unless it's exactly the nut flush draw, which we block. Maybe rarely something like ace king, ace queen with a backdoor flush draw, but again, those are very few combos, and I think that's rare, so I think we do have some showdown value here. I don't think raising is bad either, but overall, I don't think our range wants to check raise very often, so yeah, I think putting this in a calling range is the most frequent option.
I think you make a good point there. It's easy to think we don't have showdown value because he has a bunch of better ace highs. You have to keep in mind if those ace highs are actually going to be in this line. So I'd expect hands like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10 to very often go for a check back. I don't think it's intuitive for players at low stakes to go for a big bet with those hands, unless, like you say, they are, those hands with a flush draw or a backdoor flush draw. And given that we have the ace of hearts, he obviously can't have the flush draw. One thing I would say that I like that our hero has recognized here is just that he said, I have some fold equity, but he recognized that versus the big bet, it implies he has less fold equity. I think that's good recognition there, especially against real life opponents that are probably not going to be balanced in the sizes that they're using.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the same thing when it's a tight range spot, it's generally harder to find a lot of bluffs. But that being said, we still beat a bunch of his natural natural draws and bluffs. And I think Hero also mentioned that he's comfortable getting it in against the flop re-raise if he does check raise, right?
Yeah, so he said, I'm happy to call or shove if villain re-raises. And I think that, yeah, I think there's a slight misplace of logic there in that I don't think this is like the type of hand we would want to do that with. And I think, again, we have to recognize just how much villain's range is going to change if he three bets our check raise. He's really going to be polarizing to extremely strong hands. And I don't think that's going to I don't think we're going to want to be jamming with a hand like a6, even though we have the flush draw against that range.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I remember this was one big leak of mine in the past. I used to get it in with flash draws in any spot, no matter the SPR, because I have a flash draw. But yeah, I just don't think that's a profitable play, and I think we should keep that in mind. So, yeah, to summarize, I think calling here is perfectly fine. Raising is good, but I would mostly call. Any other thoughts, or should we go to the turn?
No, yeah, that seems good.
He goes for a check, and now villain bets 7 big blinds.
Okay, so Hero said, on the turn, I also hit a gutter. Villain bets smaller in proportion to the pot than he did on the flop. I think I should definitely raise here with my combo draw, particularly as Villain has reduced their bet size, displaying weakness. I think I have a lot of fold equity. I think I overvalued my showdown by calling.
Yeah, maybe this is, I don't know, a bit of the other way around. I think this is definitely the kind of spot where if you do go for a check raise, you might get shoved on quite often. I think people might get a bit over suspicious on double flash draw boards. So, yeah, I don't think it would be a huge mistake, but I would avoid, having to call a raise or a shove with this hand. And in terms of showdown value, yeah, I would say we don't have a lot, but again, we need to remember that he bets quite small, and we don't we don't need to win this hand very often, and we do have a bunch of outs. So basically, any heart, any four, and in a lot of cases, even an ace can be good. And even though we don't beat a lot of bluffs, it's quite easy for him to find here, lower flash draws, or even some backdoor flash draws. So flash draws now on the turn. So yeah, I think calling here is slightly better than check raising. It depends, because people do tend to undershove. And on this texture, I'm not sure. I think calling is perfectly good here.
Yeah, I think your thoughts are good in that we have to, I think we have a really nice hand to call here with a6 of hearts because we unblock villain having a lot of worse draws. So villain can have the king queen of hearts, the king jack, king tens, the queen jack, queen tens, queen nine suited, both in hearts and in diamond combos, and we're actually ahead of all of those hands. And again, people are often reluctant to bluff flush draws when they miss on the river. So I think we actually have more showdown value than we realize. But one thing I did want to highlight here is villain's turn sizing. So our hero here thought that this displayed weakness. What I would highlight here is that this is probably a fine turn sizing from our opponent. When the turn is the 5 of diamonds, it's going to improve our range quite a lot. We're going to have some 4-5s, some ace-4s. We're going to have some pocket 5s. So on a turn card like this, villain probably does want to use some smaller sizes as opposed to a lot of over bets or bigger bets. I think you could perfectly see over pairs choosing this size and on the turn. I don't think this is a spot where we necessarily do want to be having a lot of over bets. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with your thoughts. Although often they do show sizing tells, and I would actually expect weaker players to go for an overbet here with stuff like a set. But I would not assume that as at the first sight, and that's why I think, and we mentioned before, it's very good and might be very plus EV to start taking notes on opponents. But yeah, I do agree with your thoughts. A smaller sizing here is definitely not necessarily showing weakness or anything. Um, I assume our hero calls if he's complaining about not check raising.
Yep.
And the
We
river
see
is
it.
a 7. And we're facing a pot size. But
Yeah, so Hero said, villain bet pot and I fold. I actually think this pot size bet is a bit odd after reducing his bet size on the turn. I considered calling, as villain seems polarized. I beat lower miss flush draws. I did not consider raising, which might be interesting, to try to get overpairs to fold. Villain should not have many full houses as he raised from under the gun, but I can have them. Overall, I think this hand shows that I have too little aggression in some spots.
um, I wanted to say he seems like he's just constantly worried of not being aggressive enough. Maybe he did saw some of his stats, or I don't know. His red line might not be great or something, and he might have this underlying fear. I would say that he's not aggressive enough. But in this particular hand, I think it's played just right, and we don't need to be more aggressive. Um, on the river, I think again this is a bluff catching spot, and the way I would think about it is, first of all, first question I will ask, is my hand a bluff catcher? And yeah, definitely. But I mean, we're not beating any value here. And then, is this spot over bluffed? Well, from what I know from pool analysis, again, it's a tight range spot. He started with a big bet, which shows us he's quite polar and likely stronger than he should be. So, based on all this, I would think, this spot is just under bluffed and I would fold. He was mentioning raising the river. To be honest, I don't think I hate that. Exploitatively, it's probably not a GTO play. But yeah, people tend to massively overfold to river races, and I don't think we block a lot of bluffs with the Ace of Hearts. We do have more full houses, we do have more 7x. So, yeah, depending on who you're playing against, I wouldn't hate that, but I would also be careful with those plays. Any thoughts on that, Paul?
Um, yeah, I would be careful against this opponent who, went big on the flop. Yes, he sized down a little on the turn, but again, he's gone for just under pot size here on the river. This is definitely not an automatic bet sizing, so maybe again he's clicked pot and scrolled down, or he's input sizing. So again, you could take something away from this in terms of notes if you ever get to do see showdowns against him. But yeah, if I was thinking of check raising river as a bluff, I think I would just want to block some of his value range. So I think I'd rather bluff with a hand that contains a 5, just because you're going to block some of his pocket 5s that could potentially take this line. Maybe they don't always bet for the bigger size on flop. So yeah, I think it's I think that might be an argument. But yeah, I would probably just fold this in game. I think this is really well played from Hero. And yeah, again, just touching on what you said, we don't have to win every hand. We just have to take the highest EV option in every hand, So don't worry about if you're not aggressive enough. Again, that can come from looking at your red line and thinking you're not aggressive enough. But again, don't just apply that to every spot. In this situation, I think he played it really well. I wouldn't have done anything different.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's also well played. But there's something I would disagree with, though. I think most people, I don't know our hero, I've never seen his stats, I don't know how he plays, but I think most people playing 50 NL and under should worry about not being aggressive enough. But as you said, this doesn't mean you have to apply it in every spot, or that you should be more aggressive in every spot. I think most people are actually too passive, but you should learn smart aggression, and you should learn which are the spots to start and apply aggression. And as you said, I think our hero recognized here on the flop, it's a big bet, and probably that's why he called. And I think that was a good intuition or thought process.
Yeah, just before we leave this hand, we got asked in the chat what would be our value threshold for jamming the river here in hero shoes.
That's a really good question.
I think for me, I'd probably end up jamming most. I think I'd have jam most of my 7x, because I think there can just be too many overpairs in the average 20. This one was actually played at 25 now, so I think there can just be too many overpairs in the average 25 and players range here, and I wouldn't expect to see many of those finding a hero fold. So I think I would be fine jamming any 7. What about yourself? Do you think it's a little bit?
Um, no, I think it's actually, if we think about the thumb rule that we need to get called by 50% worse hands, I think it becomes a bit dodgy, but I think a factor that plays in here is I don't really expect him to have many better hands. Like, first of all, I would assume this guy is a weaker player because his sizings are just not super standard, and I don't know, his sizings are just weird, and then there are not many 7x in his range, so I think he just has too many weak hands to call with. But I'm not sure if I agree with him calling his overpairs, and that's why I was saying I think I would like check shoving the river here, because I do actually expect a fold from overpairs from most players, but I don't know, maybe that's a bit too ambitious. And when we're talking about raising river here, I think there are two factors into play. That if this is an overbluffed spot, then raising becomes worse, because when we raise, we need to basically fold some of his value hands and his bluffs. And like when he doesn't have bluffs, then we need to fold more of his value hands. So yeah, I think it's super exploitative and a bit of an overstretch. But yeah, I think
Yeah, although in this spot we thought that it was going to be too value heavy, right? But where do we think the value range is coming from? If we're playing against a good regular and we don't think he's going to be opening full frequencies of pocket twos, pocket threes, pocket fives, then I think his value range is going to be condensed around having more overpairs, right?
Yeah.
One thing I would keep in mind here, just if you have a 7x on the river and you're unsure of whether you should go for value or not, I think I would always go for value with my a7, because you're going to be able to get called by some 6-7 and 7-8 in villain's range. Where if you had, say, 6-7, maybe that's a little bit closer, because villain can still have 7-8 and a7. But again, that's going a bit into the weeds. But we also got asked in the chat if ace-6 of hearts is a good bluff candidate, given we block 7-6 of hearts. What's your thoughts on that, Alex?
I think it's definitely an advantage, because we can't say, and definitely in poker we shouldn't think in black and white terms, and we can never say, he never has a 7, he never has 3s, he never has deuces. He sometimes has it, and when he does have a 7, I think it's very likely that he's going to have a7, which is not going to be offsuit, so a7 of hearts, and then 6-7 of hearts. I think those are very likely to be in his range, and value bet for desizing and not fold to a shove, I assume. So yeah, I think our blockers are actually quite good, and in my opinion, we're also not blocking a lot of bluffs, because most people just don't go triple barrel bluff with non-miss flash draw. So it's not the best hand. I think it's not the best bluff. I think we'd rather have some paired hands, something like 3-4, 5-4, 5-6, I assume. But I also don't think it's terrible if we expect the spot to be overfolded. And in my field, at least, I think most people, unless they are superstitioning, will fold most of their overpairs.
Yeah, I think some things to keep in mind here. I know like a lot of you guys are going to be playing live or lower stakes online. Is really understanding who your opponent is, because if this is the type of guy that's insanely crazy, he opens a lot of hands, then we should definitely be shoving a 7 on the river. And if he's a really nitty reg and he's capable of folds, then maybe we can start to bluff rivers. But understanding who your opponent is going to be really important. One thing I would just like to mention, which we haven't mentioned yet for the stream, is that this week Run It Once Essential is going to be free. So if you guys would like to create a free basic account on Run It Once, you're actually going to get access to all of the essential content. And just looking over this hand, I'm going to post in the chat a video which is relevant to this hand. So this is Steve Paul, who goes through looking at playing in the big blind versus c-bets. Now in this video that I just sent to you guys, we're looking at button versus big blind, but after this video, Steve has a couple of later videos which look at playing, I think, from MP, and then look at playing from under the gun versus bigger sizings. So if you check out Steve Paul playing against the big blind, playing as the big blind and defending, I think this is going to help a bunch of you guys gain some heuristics and gain a bit better understanding in this spot. And it's free as well, so why not?
Cool. Next hand then?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, 2.5 big blind open from the button, and our hero goes for a 3-bet with 7-6 suited. I think I like this. I mean, I do like this. I think most people under 3-bet the big blind, and in order not to under 3-bet the big blind, we should find quite a bunch of these suited connectors, maybe even suited 1-gappers, and just a bunch of these polar hands. I do like this 3-bet. I don't know, any thoughts you have or any thoughts Hero has?
No, I think it's good. Nice to see Hero taking this action. I think it's very easy as the big blind to just see 6-7 and just fall into autopilot and click call. But yeah, finding some of these 3-bets I think is going to be really good, and it's going to set you apart from other players, especially if you're playing in those lower stakes games.
Okay, he gets called, and the board is Jack 9-5 with a flush draw.
Okay, I'll give you Hero's thoughts.
Okay.
So Hero said, I think this is not a great board to c-bet. The Jack and the 9 hit villain's range, and he can have a lot of draws that continue too. At the same time, I have draws, and I need some bluffs. I have other bluffs too, clubs for instance, and 7-8 suited for a double gutter. But I didn't want to check call or check raise 6-7 suited or check fold with a backdoor flush draw. So I bet I did consider a check raise, but I would have saved that for a stronger combo draw. So the first thing I would say is that I really like his thoughts here, especially on the way he is constructing different portions of his range. I think it's very easy to just get into a spot and think, I'm going to do X with my hand, and not consider other portions of your range and understand, how different portions of your range are going to want to take different actions. So I think this is really good from Hero.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with his thought process, and I like, obviously we should think in terms of our range, not our hand, but when we think of our range, then we also need to decide what we do with each hand. And I like him mentioning, I think his thought process is really good in the sense that he's thinking, of all the options with his hand. Like, we could bet, yes, then we could check raise, and then he's thinking of I think at least he's thinking of the implications of check raising, and because of that, I definitely think betting here is good, because I agree with him. We don't want to check all a hand like this. It's a bit too weak, no showdown value, not that many turns that improve us, and check raising here should be reserved for not necessarily combo draws, but at least hands with a bit more equity. If we have like a backdoor with, I don't know, actually king, queen, king, 10, those are combo draws. Even ace 10, we want to have an overcard here to check raise, and yeah, I think betting is fine. One thing I would also add, did he say this is not too good of a board for him, or did I?
Yes, he said, I think this is not a great board to c-bet. The Jack and the 9 hit villain's range.
Yeah, what I would add about this, and it's also quite a common mistake that I see, is that when we think of how ranges interact, we just think, how does this hit villain's range? And we kind of miss thinking of how does it hit our range. And if our hero here 3-bets correctly, he should have a bunch of offsuit Jack X that in position doesn't have. He should have some weaker Jack X that in position doesn't have, like Jack 8 and so on. All his overpairs are still very good here. He has suited Jack X as well. He has 9s. So I think this board is actually very good for him, particularly if he goes for a 3-bet with the offsuit jack X.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you could pull up GTO Wizard again and we can just look at some pre-flop chats just to talk about these factors at play.
Okay, let's make it 2.25, I guess. Was that it? Oh, sorry. It's button, right?
Yeah, so button opens and it's on big blind to 3-bet. So look at the pre-flop chat for him. So yeah, first Wizard 2.25 open. Right, okay.
This
So
is
yeah,
quite
first,
interesting.
sorry?
I said this is quite interesting. It's very different from every other big blind rebetting range I've seen before, to be fair.
Yeah, and I think this is what I wanted to just highlight, is that you're going to get into the spot as you just seen here. We've got GTO Wizard, and we've got 100 different chats to use based on open sizes and rake structures. And I think it's just really important to understand what you're doing in your game. If you're going to be 3-betting a hand like Ace-Jack off here, then this board is going to be, much better for you than say in these chats. In these chats, Ace-Jack off is never 3-betting. If in game you are 3-betting Ace-Jack off, then this board is going to be generally better for you. So yeah, just keeping in mind the way you construct your pre-flop range is going to have an impact on the way you're playing post-flop. So as you can see here, hands like, there's lower suited Jack X hands like Jack 5, Jack 4, Jack 2 suited, which are going to connect with this board. There's the King Jacks, Queen Jacks, and then we have, pocket Queens, Kings, Aces, pocket Jacks. These all connect with the board. But again, in these ranges, there's not a lot of 9x 3-betting. There's not much pocket nines. So just keep in mind in your games the way they play pre-flop. That's just going to help you with better decisions when we do reach flop.
Yeah, what I would add is I think in this spot, however you construct your 3-betting range, even if it's this one, for example, looks very polar. Some other 3-betting ranges are more mergy, but I think if you construct it correctly, however you construct it, you will kind of have a lot of Jack X in your range. And again, you will always have the overpairs. That button is going to 4-bet most of the times or very often. So on this Jack High board, it's going to be very often quite a good board for us, and we can bet, even big, we can bet quite often. So yeah, I like this bet. Anything else to say about this the flop?
No, I do. I did want to just mention. I really like his sizing. So something I see something I see players do a lot is just automate to a 33% sizing in 3-bet pots. But I think this shows good recognition from our hero here. If I was going to be betting this flop, my bet sizing is going to be driven by my value hands, and those are generally going to be strong Jack X plus. And so I would want to go for the bigger sizing. So I could see pocket queens and pocket kings really wanting to go for this bigger sizing on this board.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you made. I agree. Okay, he calls and the turn is a 9, pairing the board.
Okay, and villain goes for a shove. So he said, I over shove here, having now also hit a flush draw. I didn't want to check raise, as I would save that for open-ended straight draws and double gutters with flush draws, but I also didn't want to check call or check fold. Stacks are awkward for a more standard size bet, so I just shove. In hindsight, I don't like it. I'm not doing this with aces because it's a paired 9 on the board. I'm not betting most 9x on flop, so I'm not repping much 9x when I shove the turn. I think I'm only shoving a full house value, so it's easy to overbluff here, which is what I have done. I think I should only bluff my straight flush draws, which I have a bunch of here. Feels gross to me, but I think it's better to give up on this turn card with my hand.
Yeah, interesting spot. What I would say is that this is something you see quite often when the turn brings a double flush draw after after a big bet in a 3-bet pot. We actually do shove very often, and it's a size we pick quite often. On a paired board, I'm not actually sure how often that keeps happening, particularly because, as he said, when we bet big on the flop, we don't have as many 9x. So yeah, I'm not sure if we keep using this size on a paired board. Did you want to say something?
Sorry, if you finished.
Yeah, I wanted to say about the other thing. He said that he should just give up and he's gonna face a bet and so on. Again, I don't think it's mandatory that when we check here we are going to face a bet or a bit or a bet that's too big for us to call profitably. I think very often it's going to go check check and we can realize our equity, or he bets 1/3 and we can just call. So yeah, I don't think checking here is terrible either, and I think you should consider the option. I think also the option of betting something like half pot is viable. So yeah, not sure if the shove is good or bad. I think it does make some sense. I think from other points of view it's not great. But what I want to highlight is that I think there are other options as well.
Yeah, one thing I would just say is, again, I just really like Hero's thought process in this spot. He's thinking about different portions of his range. He's understood that the 9 isn't as good for him because he's not going to be taking the line on flop with 9x. So there's quite a lot of recognition just into, how his flop play is interacting with his turn play. He's thinking about how different portions of his range is going to play. I think, although he's taking this action with this hand, I think he might take this action with some other portions of his range. That makes sense as well. So if our hero had a hand like Ace Jack or Pocket Queens, given the board, I think he might find a shove with those hands, which again I think I like. He did say that aces aren't going to be taking this action, and that might be true. Maybe aces, particularly when you have a diamond or a club, might want to find a check. But yeah, there are going to be portions of his range that are going to want to shove. Hands like the Jack X, the strong Jack X, the Queens, the Kings, and you are going to have some bluffs. And this does seem like one that is, it does seem like a good bluff, We're going to be getting a lot of overcards to fold, so Villain's going to have to just fold with some hands like King Queen, Queen 10. He's going to be in a real tough spot with some of his Jack X. He's going to be folding some 5x. So yeah, I think, Pocket 10s are in a real tough spot. I actually think this play makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'd be interested to see what GTO is doing here and compare.
This is big blind.
Yeah, big blind versus button, 3-bet pot.
Should we keep these ranges?
Yeah, keep these ranges. It seems fine.
Here, actually, big blind didn't have a lot of 7. What? Okay, I'm sorry, I just picked preflop only range, so we'll have to change that. What is it?
Jack bang 5 with flush being in the 9 and the 5. Jack of diamonds.
Okay, so we see here actually quite a low frequency bet. Is this? Yeah, quite a low frequency bet. Let's check how comes this happens and what the preflop ranges are. Yeah, we do have a lot of Jack X here. Let's make it. Okay. And what's his calling range? Quite tight, as it's quite a big size. Going back to the flop. Okay, so as you see, our betting frequency is quite low. I expected it to be a bit higher, but I think what's happening here is, as this range is quite polar and it contains a lot of offsuit ace-x and a bunch of these kind of hands, we probably don't want to see bet as often, and that's why we wanted to highlight. It's very important to think of how you 3-bet pre-flop and how the board hits you and how often you miss and so on. But as you see, the sizing that it picks, it's quite big, and this particular hand is always a bet.
Yeah, very often betting, which is again, good recognition from Hero. And yeah, we didn't choose 75%, but we did choose a large C bet here, so I think that's good.
I thought it was close to 75.
Yeah, it was close. I think it's around 66%. So yeah, it was a big C bet. Which I like.
Okay. Interesting to see. He's supposed to fold all 10s here. I guess this is based on blockers and that he just blocks a bunch of his bluffs, but he does call almost all king queen. Did you want to add
Yeah.
something here?
No, I was just going to say how I don't, keep in mind in your games whenever you look at a sim, always try to apply it to your own games. And I don't think in basically any games you're going to find many pocket tens folding that spot.
Yeah.
Maybe you do sometimes, but yeah, whenever you're going to look at a sim, think about how it applies to your own games. So you got a nine of diamonds, and yeah, that's interesting. So as you can see here, our primary sizing, in fact our only sizing, is going to be an all-in. And again, it is driven by those pocket queens, pocket kings, and some ace-jack that wants to bet. If we look at our exact hands here, 7-6 of diamonds is always check-in. But as you can see, the EV between check and all-in is not miles apart. And again, in keeping with understanding how these sims relate to your own game, if we press all in and look at how imposition is supposed to respond, I think it's really good to just see what sort of hands he's supposed to call with and what he's supposed to fold with. So as you can see here, hands like, I think those ace fives have flush draws, right? Yeah, so those have flush draws. Those are going to be probably pretty easy continues. 9x is going to be pretty easy continues. Yeah, I think most of this looks pretty standard. I don't think that is anything outrageous here. So maybe in this spot, it is a spot where you want to stick relatively close to the sim if people are going to be playing fairly well first the all in.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. I actually think this might be overcalled. Like queen 10, which is a combo draw with a flush draw, always folding here. Yeah, this is maybe not that close to real games and super based on blockers, why clubs always fold and diamonds always call. But yeah, I don't really see people folding, open-ender straight flush draw here.
Yeah, so we're only missing the queen 10 of clubs. What's ace 5? Ace 5 was always calling, right? Yeah. So queen 10 of clubs, what's jack 10 doing? Yeah, jack. Oh, yeah, it's just jack 10 of clubs. Yeah, so I don't think it's a million miles away. There's some slight differences, but yeah, I think people would call the queen 10 of clubs for sure, or most opponents would, I think.
And let's see what's happening if we do decide to check. Yeah, he's supposed to bet super often and quite thin. Which again, like if you look at this, I don't think people are betting, these kind of hands for value / protection, whatever it is, stuff like 5-4, 6-5, I don't know, even ace-5 without a flush draw. There's a bunch of hands here that, average opponents at lower stakes, I don't think they bet. And this is why I think we might actually over-realize our equity here when we check. So, we don't have to think, I need to give up if I check, it's not good to check all, because he might actually just, check back a lot in this spot.
Yeah, again, not always think that we're going to face a certain action, and just being aware that it's okay to check, because sometimes it's going to go check, and we might make the best hand on the river, or we might have a hand that we decide to bluff with, and, we might capture more EV that way as well. But overall, I think it's not a bad hand. I think even if there's some slight mistakes in this, I really like the way that our hero thought about this hand. It's not always about making the correct decision every time, but as long as you have a really good thought process and a good reasoning why you're doing something, that's going to be the main thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's probably going to take you further, trying to actively think about every hand and find out the principles behind that, than, going on autopilot and someone seeing, I made a good EV play, yeah, it's fine, whatever, but, just autopiloting and not having a good thought process. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, one thing I would just add again into the chat for everyone is there's a really good video on Run It Once Essential of Sean Powell's, who goes through looking at big blind versus button in 3-bet pots. It's quite a theory-orientated video, but he's looking at a lot of different flops, and then looking at our c-bet frequency on multiple different boards. So I'll just post that into the chat for you guys again. I think it's going to be a really nice video for you guys to watch and get an idea of the type of boards that we can see bet very often as the big blind and for different sizes, and then other boards where we might want to find more checks as well. So yeah, you can check that out for free on the Essential plan. Just create a free account on Run It Once.
Cool, thank you. Should we go next hand? Actually gonna
Yeah.
take a very quick toilet break and I'm gonna be back in 3 minutes, so I'll let you talk to our chat. Be funny.
Okay, thanks. I could have done that 30 seconds ago when I was talking about the Run It Once plan. So yeah, not sure how to keep a crowd going by myself. If you guys have any questions, then post them in the chat and I'll try to answer. Not sure what video we're going to be looking at next. So yeah, not sure what to say. She could have helped me out a little bit earlier, but I'll go on a bit quicker. Something actually I would like to ask you guys is what type of video content you'd like to see on Run It Once Essential membership. I'm pretty new to the site in a coach there, and I'd like to know exactly what people want to see. At the moment, I'm just trying to create videos that I think give a lot of value in content, but I'd be more, I'd be happier in producing content that, yeah, the viewers would actually really want to see produced. Okay, not sure if you guys can see the video links that I've posted. Let me just quickly check that for you. The video links are showing up for myself, but yeah, if anyone else can confirm if they're seeing the video links that I've attached in the chat, that would be great. Okay, they're not coming up, are they? Right, okay. I might be disabled. Sorry, I'm not. I might be disabled. I might be unallowed to post links in the chat. Just as sometimes there's like a spam filter, so maybe that's what's happening. Wondering if Run It Once can post the videos. Something I'll do for you guys is I'll post these video links in both the Run It Once Discord channel and also in mine and Alexandra's Discord channel. So if you guys want to head to one of those, I think this is how you can see those links, how you can see the Discord.
Again?
I'll try and get these video links into the chat now before the end of this stream. Yeah, sure, we can jump on to the next hand if you like.
Yeah, I heard the discussion and I remember I had this issue before. It's probably a spam filter.
A spam filter, yeah, I thought so.
Okay, so next hand our hero opens the MP, hijack. You say no one calls it hijack, so MP. And we get a call from the cutoff. First thing I would mention is on most sides, we shouldn't really have calls from cutoff, and there are particular occasions, you know, when we have massive recreational in the blind, we probably want to have some flats, but overall I think it mostly indicates a weaker player. And then a call from the big blind, and we go multi-way on king 6-5 flush draw. Any thoughts on this?
Sorry, I was just trying to help with the link situation. For the videos, so we open ace-3 and we get called in 2 positions. No, one thing I would just be mindful of whenever we approach a flop and we are multi-way is just that we are multi-way, and just recognize that equities are going to be split 3 ways. So this is not a normal situation in poker, as in heads up, where you're just splitting your equity with one player, and you know often one player or the other is going to have an advantage. In multi-way spots, we're often going to find ourselves in murkier waters where we're unsure of exactly who has the advantage, and you have to have a good understanding of what ranges should look like and how those ranges interact with different boards to have a solid idea of who is doing the best on certain boards. Again, that can become murkier when you have recreational center in the pot. So I imagine that villain 15 in his hand is going to be somewhat of a recreational calling from the cutoff. It's not something that most standard players do online. So yeah, just trying to keep those things in mind in multi-way pots.
Yeah, exactly. Here, what I would mention, because this is something that I've seen, a lot of my students make the mistake of just assuming, let's say this was heads up, and we open and get called by the button. A lot of people assume we just play this like we're like big blind versus button versus big blind or something, just see betting a lot and so on. But actually, a lot of these spots are very, very, very frequent checks. On king high boards, we can find some more c bets, but on mostly in these spots we're just supposed to range check or bet a very, very low frequency. And as Paul said, when we go multi-way, it makes it even worse because equities are split and are going to shift more often. That being said, our hero goes for a check. Does he give us any thoughts?
Yeah, we got some thoughts here. So in his hand, he said the villains are unknown. Pre-flop, I open the cutoff with this isn't the cutoff, this MP. So I open MP with ace-3 suited, which I think is standard. Flop, I understand it is best to check raise a lot out of position in single raise spots. I have the nut flush draw, so it seems like a good hand to check raise. So if we can move along the action, I guess he went for a check, big blind folded, and then cutoff went for a large bet. So he says, it seems like a good idea to check raise this hand. Calling out of position seems bad, and I can't fold, so check raise seems like the only option to me. Perhaps I could have bet flop instead. So your thoughts on this?
I think, well, obviously, if it was me here, I would really like to have some reads on the villain. I know his stats and so on. I think a large bet is less often bluffed than a smaller one. But still, if he's a recreational and he's wide, I really don't mind his check raise because, again, the ranges are going to be very wide. They are often going to overstab, and check raising this hand seems fine. At the same time, I also don't mind check calling this hand. I don't think it's, I think this hand is just indifferent, and I think it depends a lot on villain's tendencies. um, if if I think about it, I think the situation that makes calling worse than check raising is if we know after he stabs flop he's just going to barrel turn very, very often and for big sizes. Then I think I just prefer check raising flop, and otherwise I think it's pretty much indifferent.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point in just under keeping in mind what a lot of players do here. Something you can often see happening is players going for a big one and done type of bet. Sorry. So they bet big on flop and then they give up on turns. Something I also would just want to highlight in multi-way pots here is I think this would be a nice spot for us to go for a small C bet and continue ourselves. And the reason for that being is, in theory, in multi-way spots, there's not supposed to be a lot of big bets going on. And that's because nobody is really ever an EV or equity at an equity advantage with their range. And so theoretically, a lot of small bets are supposed to be happening. Now, if you check here and villain 15 goes for a big bet, he's going to be putting us into a spot that we shouldn't really be facing. And if villain 17 continues, if the big blind continues, we're now in a really tough spot because we're splitting our equity 3 ways and we're facing a big bet. As opposed to if we bet here small, we get to keep the ranges wide, and we almost get to put in the amount of money that our hand is going to be worth, if that makes sense. But again, facing this big bet, I don't mind going for a check raise. I don't mind going for a check call as well. Against some opponents that are going to stab too much, like Alexandra mentioned, I think check raise is good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do agree with your thought process on the flop. I don't think it's bad to see bad this hand. I think the flop is quite indifferent as well. Depends a lot on opponent's tendencies. But yeah, c-betting is not bad. I would just keep in mind that overall, we don't really want to see bet these boards multi-way or even heads up very often out of position.
Yeah, I think so. Just something to add to that is that if we get into a multi-race spot and we have a different portion of our range, if we've got a middling top pair hand, we're again not going to be wanting to put in lots of money with that type of hand. Yes, we might have the best hand at the moment, but against two opponents where our equities are split, we're not going to have a lot of runouts where we are, favourite against two players. And so, again, we're going to want to use smaller bet sizes as opposed to bigger ones. And we're not going to want to really face bigger bet sizes as well. So, even though sometimes opponents are making the mistake by betting too much and for a big size, in a multi-way spot, I think that goes against us slightly. But yeah, we go for the check raise and then we face a 3-bet by villain.
Very gross.
And he said, our hero says, unfortunately, I get re-raised. I think I still have good equity against peers, and villain can potentially have draws himself, so I decided to shove. I didn't want to call out position, and folding felt wrong. At the same time, I think I'm usually behind, so maybe this should be a fold.
Yeah, so I assume he ended up shoving. And yeah, I think I do agree with his thought process, and I think it's quite similar with what we mentioned with the a6 of hearts hand. That although it seems like we have a hand with a lot of equity, we really need to keep in mind and reevaluate when we face these very, very strong lines. Because our hand does have quite a bunch of equity, but I don't think it's the same against what he's repping here, because he's mostly saying he has sets and two pairs, and if he ever has a bluff, it's probably going to be something like 7 8 of diamonds, which is a combo draw, or 5x of diamonds, which is already beating us. So I think as dream or slash neaty as it might seem, this should probably be a fold. Unless you're facing a massive, massive whale who's just, going out of line, but that's super infrequent compared to how often you're gonna face someone who's just telling you the strength of their hand.
Yeah, I agree. I think in this spot, it's going to be extremely hard for villains, even if they are, recreationals, to have um, much of a bluff range here. They do interact with this board. They're going to have pocket fives, pocket sixes, hands like king six, king five suited. Um, so yeah, I would approach um, this re-raise with caution. It does seem extremely nitty to find a fold here, but I do think that it probably is going to be um, the best option given the action.
Yeah, I
And,
agree.
and again, just leading back into pre-flop and on the flop, this started off as a multi-weight pot, right? So when he bets on the flop into two people for a large size in, he's already condensed his range. Theoretically, he shouldn't be doing that with a bunch of random hands. Something like 8-9 shouldn't be doing that. And so if he's condensed his range on the flop versus check raise, he's now three betters. He's condensed his range again. It's getting really hard for him to have you know really bad hands, unless we think this guy is a massive, massive recreational player that's losing a lot of money. I think this would just always be a fold for me.
Yeah, I agree.
So we do get to see the outcome anyway, which is really good. And we see that villain had king six suited. So again, in this spot, he did show up with one of the value hands, and something I would just advise all of you to do in these spots is to just make a note of what he did here. So he bet for a big size in when jack two on the flop, and a lot of recreational players are going to be severely imbalanced in these spots. And again, for those of you that are playing live, this is going to be a really good mental note to take. Because if he has a hand like 7-8, maybe sometimes he bets for a smaller size, or if he has a hand like pocket eights, maybe he bets for a smaller size, or a king might bet for a smaller size. Um, and so, just again, get into the habit of taking notes. I think they can really add to your EV, both in live games and online.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think that's a really good point. And notes are super, super underrated, as I said. Next hand.
Yeah, one thing I don't think these links are working. I'll try again to post it into the chat. Um, but Frankie Carson has a really good video on multi-way flops. He's come up with a video called multi-way flops 5 heuristics. So I'm going to post that in the chat. If you guys can't see this link, then maybe just take a note of what the heading is, because if you sign up for the basic account, you can just see it for free. So that's Frankie Carson, multi-way flops, 5 heuristics. And he does a really good job of just breaking down 5 important concepts to understanding multi-way pots. And yeah, for those of you that are playing live or playing at lower stakes, you're often going to find yourself in spots where you're playing multi-way, and it's going to be really important to just have an idea of what's going on in those spots. And he does a very good job of breaking down those concepts.
Okay, I assume this is probably going to be another button versus big blind spot where we open 2.5, he goes for a call. And the board is Jack 6-3. Villain goes for 1/3 bet. Yeah, that's what it is. I don't know what's with this thing in Hold the Manager. On the flop, I think you can use multiple strategies on this board. I think going 1/3 quite often is good. I don't think we can range bet unless we're facing someone who's really passive and definitely under check raising. Then we could also go for a range bet. We could go for a bigger size as well, I assume. It's just that we need to be able to construct our range well for the sizing we pick. And if we do that, I think the EV is going to be quite close. Any thoughts about c-betting here?
So just to give you Heroes notes, they said our position was an aggro reg, and on the flop I mix and would bet this hand sometimes and check sometimes, as I expect him to be too aggressive. So yeah, up to this point, I think if we have the note that Big Blind is going to be an aggressive player, yeah, I think mixing with this hand makes some sense. This is a hand that we would want to bet sometimes. It's quite a dry board on Jack 6-3. You know, a lot of his calling range is gonna contain, you know, Broadway hands, or, you know, higher card hands, higher hand cards. I hope you get what I'm trying to say. So you know, this is quite a dry board. There's not a lot of draws going on, so that would lead me to bet 7-6 sometimes here. But against the aggro villain, I think, you know, checking with a hand like this can make a lot of sense as well. So yeah, on flop, I don't mind either.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think we might want to lean towards a bit more checking against an opponent that's really aggressive. That doesn't mean betting's a mistake, but exploitatively it might be good to check. Although we do need quite a bunch of protection, so for that reason, I also think betting's fine.
Yeah, just to reiterate the point there is, if we're against a passive opponent, then I'm probably always going to bet this hand, and the reason for that is we're just going to gain a lot by getting hands like 9-10 to fold, or 7-8 to 9-10 to fold, or Queen-9 to fold. You know, Queen-9 of clubs, Queen-9 off, King-9, King-10. There's going to be a bunch of hands in villain's range that he's going to fold, even versus a small bet. So yeah, the more passive opponent I would probably find a bet with here. And aggro, I think I would mix, because again, you know, against an aggro opponent, you might face a lot of heat on the turn. So sometimes just betting small on the flop makes sense. So yeah, I like Hero's thoughts in mixing here.
Yeah, exploitatively, I think you made a very good point that against a passive opponent, we should probably bet all the time. What I would like to add here is something that might be a bit counterintuitive as an exploit, is that we actually want to bet more often and more thin against passive opponents, and the reason for that is when we put our hand into a bluff catching range, when our opponent is too passive, our hand loses a bunch of EV as a bluff catcher, but then it does gain EV as a value bet because we're not going to face as much pressure. So I think in this spot, that shows up quite well, but it's a concept that applies across a lot of spots, and I think something that you should keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay, so we're not against a passive opponent, we're against an aggressive opponent, and they show us why they're aggressive. They go for the check raise here. And thoughts from Hero were, I thought this is a good 3-bet hand, as it doesn't have a lot of good turns and also blocks a lot of villains' possible value, as in 6-3, Jack 6, and pocket 6s. So I'm guessing in position here, 3-bet the check raise.
To 18 big blinds.
18 big blinds. Okay. What are your thoughts on this?
I have mixed feelings about it because um, it really depends on the villain, right? If we were against a passive opponent, this means he's probably under bluffing flop, and we don't want to find a lot of three bets. Against an aggro opponent, I think he could find enough check raises, uh, maybe a bit too many check raises, and I think having a six is quite good to three bet. Um, I also think, if we had like something like 6-4 with a backdoor 6-5, it's a bit better to call because we have some added equity. So yeah, we can continue. We're gonna have more good turns that we can call on. Um, yeah, I think this is okay. It's something that I would find sometimes, but yeah, definitely not always, and I think we should be quite careful with this. Um, I do agree that when we find three red bluffs on this board, we should probably have a six, maybe a three. But I think it's a very, very low frequency play, and we should be quite careful how often we take it, especially against opponents that are a bit careful.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. And again, if we're gonna be very selective about the type of 3x and 6x we choose to put in this line, maybe we want to choose the 6x or the 3x with hearts because sometimes we can go runner and a flush, or maybe we might want to choose a hand like 3-4 or 5-6 because sometimes you can go runner and a straight. So they're just like really, really like minuscule points, but just having an idea of those, I think, is going to help in situations where you're not going to do something very often. So let's try and choose the very best combos we can.
Did you say those are better?
I would imagine that something like 5-6 might be slightly better because we have slightly more equity, right? Like we can make some straights on some turns and rivers as opposed to with 6-7.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the reason why I would.
Sorry, 6-7. 6-7 actually does still make a straight. My bad, I missed that. 4 and a 5 gives us a straight.
No, it's not. It's a straight draw, but it's not great. It's just a gut shot.
No, what I'm saying, sorry, is when we three bet here, sometimes the turn will be a 4 and the river will be a 5. We have a straight. So it leads me to use say 6-7 more often than a hand like 8-6.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. I would think that we want to be quite polar here, so that we want to three bet these combos that are not good enough to call, but like not too good to fold. So that's what I would think. This one without a backdoor and without a better backdoor straight draw might go for it more often. We can check that out actually how we construct our range here.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how we have the same ideas, but we end up choosing different hands for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. Jack. Oh, let me change this to GTO Wizard. Jack.
So this is at the point now where we see which one of us is the solver.
Big Blind has some donks here. I think we should just take those out.
Don't worry about taking out. Just press check, right?
We can't because this is not the AI. Yeah, we see a bit of every bat size being used. This probably means that doesn't really matter. As I said, you just need to construct your range well for the bat size you pick. I'm surprised to see so much checking. And facing a check raise. You see actually our bluffs does come from the 6x region.
Yeah, but it was the factor that you were talking about more than what I was talking about. So I would imagine I imagine that something like 5-6 and 6-7 might be a better raise because it has the extra equity on turns and rivers. But in fact, that's better utilized in a call line because we're more likely to see the turns and rivers if we just call as opposed to the time when we go for the three bet. So we are using those 8-6, 9-6, 10-6, which can't turn and river some straights because I guess when we raise on the flop, we're probably not going to see turns and rivers as often, right?
Yeah.
As when we just call.
Yeah, exactly. But whatever it is, I think if you're in the spotting game and you do it with 6-5 of what is it like hearts instead of I don't know, 8 6 of spades. I think that doesn't really matter as much because it's such a low frequency spot, and as long as you recognize the qualities of the hands that you want to have, meaning you mostly want to have a 6 or probably a 3,
Yeah,
then I think you're just fine.
yeah, makes sense. Okay, so yeah, we go for the 3-bet and out of position calls. And then we see a king turn, and our hero said, on the turn, I'm quite confused. I'm not sure what to do. I just autopiloted and folded. So I guess, is there a donk? Right,
Yeah,
okay.
there's a
So
donk.
our position goes for a donk on the king of hearts, and our hero autopiloted and folded. Don't think this line is overbluffed in general, but I also don't find much value that makes sense. Then I thought I have better hands to call with. So what's your thoughts on this spot?
I think the more I think about it, like, yeah, I would agree that if you check some MDA, I mean, if you check any MDA, I don't see who has enough sample to check out what's happening in this spot. So I think we should just think of combos, value, opponent's tendencies, and yeah, I agree. It's very hard, difficult to find value because if I'm thinking like, I don't know, does he do this with ace jack to get some protection and he assumes we're folding some good hands because the king comes. I don't really see why he would lead here with what kind of value. I think if he does have value, he's probably just expecting us to bet and then going for a double check raise if he wants protection. I just think this is very weird, and I think our 6 blockers is still quite good, so I'd be quite suspicious about this. But it's a very weird, rare spot, so.
It is a very weird spot, but I'm just trying to think of what out of position is thinking by doing this, and I guess maybe in his mind he's thinking that the king is slightly better for his range because he's going to have more combos of king jack. So if we think about, or if we can go back to the sim actually and look at the hands that we're supposed to be raising, or sorry, 3-betting on the flop with. Um, Okay, so it looks like it's pocket queen. Yeah, I was imagining that there's going to be a bunch of pocket queens and a hand like ace jack. So as you can see, ace jack is doing it slightly more than king jack. Pocket queens is roughly the same as kings. But if our out of position villain thinks that we're going to be doing this primarily with ace jack and pocket queens, the king in some ways makes a lot of sense for him to donk on because he's going to have a bigger proportion of a hand like king jack. Um, can we go back to the board
Oops,
again?
sorry. I didn't show this, so just for people to see, because I missed the button. We are supposed we're not rebetting often, but our value range, as Paul says, is actually constructed around these jackaxe and these overpairs that need protection. Even these lower jackaxe, as you see, particularly with the flush draw, they 3-bet quite often. And going back to the hand.
Yeah, so I just think that maybe it's out of position here, just trying to deconstruct why he's going for a donk here. I think it could make some sense if he thinks that your flop 3-betting range is going to be heavily condensed around ace jack and pocket queens. Then it makes sense that he might want to go for some donks if the king greatly improves his range. Um, I think that is possibly the case because I don't imagine you're going to be raising a hand like King Jack on the flop. Seems like a pretty good call down hand, and he's often going to check raise a hand like King Jack, and then probably always continue versus 3-bet. I would imagine. Again, I'm just trying to dive into why I think our opposition is doing this. It might not be the case. Um,
Yeah, if you put it like that, he probably would check raise some king jack. Although it really going back to preflop ranges again. He might be the type who's just 3-betting king jack suited 100%. I would 3-bet that 100%, and maybe king jack off 50% or whatever, and then he's left with too little of those hands. Um,
yeah,
and
that's true.
if it's not a turn that improves his range that often, yeah, it does improve king jack, which is still a small part of his range, I would assume. I don't think donking here makes a lot of sense. So, I think that's probably a tell, like something weird that he does.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe you would expect more of a donk on something like seven of diamonds or two of diamonds or something, right? Because that is going to be a card that you would definitely see equity shift quite dramatically on, as opposed to this type of card. But I was just trying to, just try to come up with the reasons behind the donk. I think whenever a villain does something, if you're playing it, I'm not sure what stakes were these actually, because if it's 25 and all, we don't need to read into it. If we're playing
Um,
at higher stakes,
this is 100 on
100. Okay, yeah. So maybe it's something we just don't need to read into at all. But if it was, a 200 or 500, yeah, it would be something that I might want to read into and try to find out why our opponent is doing this. If he's a good regular. If he's not, then he might just have king four of diamonds here and just be playing his hand strength.
Yeah. What do you think overall about the whole population? Because I think this is not something that rugs do very often, but thinking of recreationals and the thought process might be similar, might just be the kind of thing that he doesn't know what to do against the bat, and that's why he ends up donking. I think we're gonna check back a lot of this king, although that's not true. It's just quite weird, and we can't really know, right, what he's doing.
Yeah, one thing I would say is like my thought process on Donkey on the King was given because Hero has said that villain was an aggro reg. Now this is something you're going to see recreationals do a lot more than regs is going for donks. Um, and yeah, I think against a recreational, a lot of the time they're going to be playing their hand strength, so you're very often going to see something like Jack X of diamonds or King X of diamonds. Um, yeah, I think they just end up playing their hand strength, and so then it's not so much about us playing our range as opposed to just playing our own hand as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So hero here.
And what I mean by that, just to clarify, is if I've got a hand like pocket jacks or ace king, something like this, maybe I want to find a raise because I think villain's going to have quite weak hands, but hands with a lot of equity. And if I have a hand like 7-6, I'll probably just fold.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Even against this guy who's supposedly an aggro rag.
Okay, so I think they've written out what they did wrong here because they put on the turn I'm quite confused and not sure what to do, so I just autopiloted it and folded. But they actually called here, so yeah, interesting to see the river. Be nice to see if we have a showdown. Okay, villain again goes for the small size and so again, if I don't want to try to deconstruct what I think a reg might be doing here. I don't think that's going to add a lot of EV to our viewers. But against, you're going to see recreational players doing this a lot. And when they do this, they're often just going to be telegraphing their hand strength through their bet sizing. Um, that's probably the biggest takeaway I would give here. So I would think that this is going to be, a weak to medium strength hand. Um, yeah, what are your thoughts on this spot, Alex, against the recreational player?
Yeah, against a recreational player, I think this is often quite mergy. I think it's often the type of I want to find out where I'm at kind of bet. I don't know what to do if you bet, so I'm just gonna take the lead, stuff like that. And I think a lot of people would be just tempted to race in these spots, and I think it has its merits, but overall, from what I see in data, fish are not really happy to fold this spot against the raise. I think their thought process is just I show weakness, he's gonna raise me, whatever, just gonna call. Um, it could work as well, but yeah, from what I see in data, fish kinda not fold these spots enough. I'm guilty of trying to make them fold very often. Doesn't really work. So yeah, I think the river is just a fold. Maybe the turn is also just a fold, because even if he has some bluffs, thinking about it, those bluffs have a lot of equity against us. We are close to that against the value hand, so yeah, I wouldn't mind folding turn either, but in position with good odds, I don't think calling is a huge mistake or whatever.
I
On the
I
turn,
actually
I
always
mean,
just fold.
not on the
I'd
river.
always fold turn. against recreational player. I'm not sure what's going on if this is an aggro reg. I think it would take too long to try and break down what's happening. So I guess we fold. We don't get to see a showdown. That's
No.
unfortunate. That would have been interesting.
Yeah, would have been very interesting.
Okay.
All right. Hero raises to 9. Not sure. Yeah, that's probably 9 big blinds. Um, and we see a flop of Queen 6-3. And we face a half pot dog. I assume this is a recreational player, right? Any thoughts from Hero?
Yeah, so our hero said villain is an aggressive recreational who donks pretty much everything that hits that flop, including underpairs and so on. So his flop thoughts are just that we're against a recreational who is donking a lot. Um, so in this spot, I think I've recently been doing a bit of work on playing versus donks against recreational players, and the one thing I would like to say to you guys, just to keep in mind, is the biggest takeaway I had from doing that work is their bet sizing is very often indicative of their hand strength. So what I mean by that is when we face a 33% sizing, we're often going to see hands like draws, third pairs, pocket pairs, second pairs. We will see some top pairs in that range, but it's overall going to be much weaker than 50% sizing. When we face a 50% sizing, you see a lot more. Again, you still see a lot of draws. You see a lot of paired hands. You see a lot more top pair coming into that region, and then when we see a 75 or a pot size bet, that is very often going to be the very strongest of draws. So on this one, that might be exclusively 4-5, and then you're going to see a lot of you're going to see hands like pocket threes, pocket sixes, ace queen, king queen, strong top pair. So yeah, when you're in game against recreational, always just keep in mind the size of the donk that you're facing. And yeah, they're often telegraphing their hand strength through their bet sizing on the flop. You will sometimes encounter players that doesn't apply to. I've seen that as well. You'll get guys that go for the pot size bet with complete air. What you've got to do in those spots is just note that that's happening, because against those players, you know, you're going to have to continue a lot, and you're also going to have to sort of ignore pot odds in a way, because their range is going to be made up of so many weak hands that is going to override the pot odds that you're facing, which is a bit counterintuitive. So yeah, take notes, guys. It's really important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Something I would add that's very, I mean, not relevant at all for this hand, but I think it's something that's great to think about in game in these situations is, if a player takes a certain line that probably shouldn't be taken very often, what does it mean for other lines he's taking? Because here, again, if we know, let's say he's doing this with a very strong range and strong draws, maybe we could exploit him just a little by slightly overfolding. But if he does this, and as our hero said, with a bunch of top pairs and everything that connects with the board, the line that we are going to be able to exploit him on is when he checks, because that means he's going to be very, very capped when he checks. So I think if you're going to start taking notes on this board, on these spots, maybe just write something like, seen him donking top pair 3 times, that means he's kept in a checking range. And there you would be able to print EV on these kind of opponents, not when you actually see them donking.
Yeah, really important to note the bet sizing, because that will indicate some portion of their range. And note the hand as well, because as Alexandra said, if this turns out to be a top pair hand, well, next time that he doesn't donk, we can probably be really aggressive as well, right? We can probably bet flop, bet turn, bet rivers if he's suddenly now not got any top pairs. So there's different ways we can exploit recreational players, and yeah, it doesn't take many showdowns just to be able to completely change your game plan against these guys.
Yeah, agreed. Our hero goes for a call, which
Yeah, I quite like that.
yeah, it's okay, but if again, it depends on what else you have. If this guy always donks half pot, this is great. I'm very happy to call here. If he always goes 1/3 and now he goes half pot, then I'll still call, but I'm already a bit, unhappy with the spot.
Yeah, but again, just to highlight how important those notes are, maybe he always donks 33% with top pair, and when he goes for half pot, it's always a draw. This
Yeah.
just highlights how massively imbalanced they are and how we can take advantage of that. But yeah, for half pot size, I would just say on that flop, I do think they can continue. They can be betting with hands like sevens, eights, and nines, as well as 6x and draws. And they are going to have queen x sometimes as well. So I think just calling makes a lot of sense.
Cool. We call heading to the turn. The turn's a king, and now he keeps donking, but sizing down at this point. Yeah. Any thoughts on this, Paul?
Yeah, so again, just as I've been trying to highlight, I think this is going to be indicative of his hand strength. I still think this could be some weaker pairs than what we have. It could be something like 4-5, almost trying to buy the river. And it can still be Queen X that is trying to go for another value bet, but is a little bit unsure against King X. So yeah, if I've got notes against this player, I'm going to play this spot completely different. Against some guys, I might, fold this hand very often. Against some players, you can get pretty out of line here because if their range is condensed around Queen X and weaker pairs, you can almost float this turn bet very often and look to be very aggressive when they bet very small or check on the river. So yeah, against this small bet, I think I probably still call. I think we are. It's not great. We are still ahead of some portions of his range, but also adding into that, I think against this villain, we might be able to bluff on some rivers as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I wouldn't think of bluffing here with tens, but I think it's not out of question if he's the correct player to do that against, and if we have some reads. What I would like to add is maybe here I would kind of look into his pre-flop, into his PFR, because we have these different kind of recreationals that even if they donk a lot and they take this line with similar hands, if we are facing someone who's like 50-15 and just PFR 15% of his hands and calling a big 3-bet out of position, I would tend to assume he doesn't really have as many hands like 4-5 or 4-7 or random stuff like that. But if he's someone who's just PFR 50% of his range, then I would be way more confident to call here, because the wider he is, the more bluffs he can find, or semi bluffs and so on.
Yeah. And again, something for you guys just to keep in mind is, when you see a board like King 6-3, you automatically think of 4-5. But against a recreational who is really wide post-flop, really wide pre-flop, really try to keep in mind the potential amount of draws that he could have on this board. So he can have hands like 7-5, 7-4, and if they're in offsuit combinations, then there's 32 combinations straight away. He can also have a hand, like we said, 4-5, which is another 16 combinations. He could have 5-2, which is potentially another 16 combinations. So before you know it, some recreationals in this spot could be massively imbalanced just to hands that are extremely weak. And even on a board as dry as Queen 6-3, if he's got too many offsuit hands, it could be a lot of hands. It could be even further. It could be shown to be even worse on a board such as Queen 9-5, where they have a lot more draws as well. So just try to keep in mind of all of the potential portions of villain's range.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Should we go to the river?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think we gave Hero's thoughts on the turn, so let me just double check. So yeah, on the turn, our hero said on the turn, I thought this is close versus the bet size, but I thought he can have enough hands like 4-5 under pairs and we get good odds on a call. So I went with a call. So yeah, as we said, we generally agree with that. And then on the river, he said river might give him extra value combos, but I thought he'd bet King X or 6X for a bigger size. So then there's Queen X left for value, which I don't expect him to bet. In retrospective, though, he would donk all of his top pairs. I might continue to see where he's at, or because he doesn't know what to do on the turn. And if he checks and faces a bet, and there's not many under pairs either, and their question was, should I fold turn or river? And what do you think? Okay, sort of lost with what they're trying to say here on this turn, but I guess what they're saying is there's different ways that they could be constructing their range on the turn. They could be continuing with some King X hands that may top pair. They could still be continuing on the turn with Queen X hands. Our hero doesn't think that they're going to continue to bet with Queen X hands on the river. We think it's just going to be King X for value.
Yeah, I think what Hero said is that on the river he expected him to bet a bigger size with King X and 6X, and didn't expect him to bet Queen X, so he thought he leans towards random bluffs and so on.
Right.
I think then he said that was a flaw in the thought process, and he probably has a lot of Queen X. That's what I got, at least.
Okay. Yeah, so I would. I mean, this seems like a really weird spot, and I'm almost a little bit apprehensive to say this again, to guys, because I don't want you guys to get into a spot where you just end up trying to, massively overbluff recreationals. But in this spot, I actually think that their range is going to be highly skewed towards being Queen X and just weak hands. As we said, they've got a lot of 4-5, 7-5, 7-4, 5-2. There's potentially just a lot of hands in their range that they can be bluffing with. So they have a bluffing range. They potentially have a weak betting range. There's not a lot of King X that's going to be donking on the flop. So I don't expect them to have a lot of King X on turn. Yes, we can be ahead of some hands like 7s and 8s and 9s. I don't know whether they take this line, betting flop, betting turn, betting river. I expect it to be a lot of Queen X. Against some opponents, when they bet small on the turn and they bet small on the river, exploitatively, I'm very tempted to go for a shove with pocket tens. And, as I said, the reason I'm apprehensive about saying that is I don't want you guys to just be shoving a hand that is looking fairly, it's not looking like a hand that we should be shoving. It seems high in our range. But I don't think it's going to be great as a call. I think Villain is going to potentially have way too many weak hands, and I think we could potentially get him to fold a huge portion of his range here. So I would actually think about going for a bluff with pocket tens. What do you think about that, Alex?
It's not really something that I would have considered, just because, I know from what I said, what I see on data is fish don't really overfold this spot, but actually, the more I think about it, the more I like it. I think it's actually a good example of thinking out of the box, especially against recreationals. We don't need to think, does my hand have good blockers? Am I balanced? Stuff like that. We should just think, highest EV option, no balance, and so on. And I think why this is an exceptional spot, because I think you highlighted well, we don't want to advise just going crazy with river shoves against recreationals betting small. But Hero says that he is probably going to donk all of the top pairs on the flop. So then I think by the river, his range is so Queen X heavy and so little King X or better hands that we probably get enough fold equity by shoving this. And yeah, I just don't think there are enough low draws that we beat compared to shoving. I think it's actually a good play, but again, quite an exceptional situation.
It's definitely an unorthodox line, and like I said, we're not advising you to do this against everybody, but against some recreationals, again, this is like really just highlights the importance of notes, because if you can get to the river against a guy where you've had some history against him, and you've noted in the past that he's always donking half pot with his draws, well, then on this river, the only option is to have a shove, and doing anything else is going to be completely, it's going to be really bad EV because he has potentially, you know, almost 50 combos or something of bluffs here, and they're all going to obviously be, well, you could actually just call against if it's only ever draws, right? Because you're ahead of them all. But if he's got, weak weak queen X in his range, and that's your note against the guy that he's donking all of his weak queen X and all of his strong queen X goes into a check line. Well, now we just get to shove all of our pocket tens, And this is how notes can just help you play completely unorthodox against recreationals, and yeah, helping you to just make what is the highest EV decision, regardless of your hand in some ways.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. What did Hero do here? One for a call, so we can see a showdown and see if we're correct. What are we gonna see here?
I think we're seeing queen 7 or queen 8 or something. Ace queen, okay, right.
Pretty close, but yeah, I assume he would mostly fold that. Again, what I would like to add here, I think that's a much worse play on a board like, I don't know, let's say king queen 4-5 double flush draw. I think in those spots they might tend to look you up way more often because they understand you have a bunch of missed draws. But on boards like this, where it's not really easy to find a lot of missed draws, even though fish are not capable of assessing ranges and so on, some things are just quite intuitive. So yeah, if I do take this play, I'd rather do it on a board like this.
One thing I think is really just important to highlight here, we're talking about taking notes and what we think his range looks like. Once we see this and we see that this guy had ace queen, he's donking the very best top pair that he can have here. Ace queen is an exceptionally strong hand, and he's chosen 50% to do that with. So what I'm going to do against this guy, a way I'm going to exploit him in the future, is if we get on a board that is similar and he doesn't donk, he immediately has less top pair, right? Because some of his top pair is going to be going into a donk bet range. And so when he checks flop, he's going to be weaker, reaching. He's just gonna have a weaker range because he would be donking some of his best top pair. So the times that we have a hand and we're unsure whether to bet or whether to check, if he's checked, I think we can go for a lot of bets with a lot of portions of our range because he's just going to have a lot more folds.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure. I think this might be the last hand we have.
Okay, let's hope it's a good one.
Yep. Here we open hijack, I assume this is MP. Sorry. Get 3-bet by the big blind for what's a smaller size than what we usually see big blind 3-betting. And we go for a call. I think this is very indifferent. In most charts, we are opening very infrequently. So for the reason that we are opening very infrequently, then we always call. But in reality, especially if this is high rake environment, what is it? Let's see. 100 NL.
On GG.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then it gets very indifferent. I don't think it's particularly losing. Depends a lot on the opponent, but it's not great. And like folding this is not a mistake. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, just to give you Hero's notes, he said we face a very nitty reg, and we actually have a lot of stats on this player. They're 20 VPIP, 17 PFR, and 7 3-bet, and they only have 39 when saw flop. So I know some of you guys might not understand what when saw flop is. So when saw flop can be an indicator of how aggressive someone is, and 39 when saw flop is extremely passive. So we have two different factors, or we have multiple factors in play here. First of all, we are told that villain is a very nitty reg, and he's playing 20 VPIP, 17 PFR, and only 7% 3-bet. So the very first thing I would say here is I'm just gonna be. I think I'm just always going to be folding a hand like this, especially at 100 and out on GG. If we've got the stats against villain, where we understand just how tight he is, and we're in a high rake environment, we don't need to be continuing hands like this. I think this is we're going to make more money by just continuing the hands that are the strong portions of our range. I think we could just fold this pre-flop. It does become a little less clear when we see that they're 39 moments or flop. So when I say they're passive, this is extremely passive. This means that we're going to massively over realize our equity against this opponent. I'm not sure what they went to showdown, what they went to showdown is. So that would be an indicator of how often they end up calling when they're being passive. So again, we would like to know what our stat is. So yeah, we can potentially over-realize a lot of equity against this opponent, but our opponent is extremely nitty and we're in a high-rake environment. So again, you guys have to keep all of these factors in mind when deciding how to deviate from your pre-flop chats, because I think this would be a mix in pre-flop chats, and given the rake, given the opponent, I think I would just always end up folding this one.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I agree with this, because what I'm thinking, I actually had this debate with a bunch of players, some of my friends recently, and I don't think I ever found a perfect answer. I don't know how to check that out objectively. But like, what's actually more important when they three bet? You know what the range is, or how they play post flop. I mean, both are important. But if our equity realization here goes massively up, I think it's a good reason to call. But again, if he's super tight, the other thing that goes through my mind is that we do want to fold more, but I think I would be more tempted to fold hands like king, jack, queen, 10, stuff like that. Because those hands will be very dominated. And why I'm thinking about that in this way here is, if you think of what you defend against 4 bets, you when you face a 4 bet, you often face a really tight range. And you see, like, these kind of hands have higher EV than something like ace queen off or queen 10 off or king 10, king jack, and so on, because they are super dominated. So for that reason, I don't think I hate this call, especially because he just goes 10 big blinds. I don't think it's great, but I get what the reasons to call here are. I think it's better to call something like lower pocket pairs and so on, that you don't need to like keep calling flop turn to see a river that you like. So those are a bit more straightforward. But yeah, I think I get the reasons why he called.
Yeah. Again, I do think these are all moving parts, and poker is fluid, and we have to be dynamic in our approach, and just sometimes think about different factors. If we're against a guy that's extremely nitty, though, just to highlight your point, maybe here I would rather call exclusively when I find the call with suited connectors with the 5-6 or the 6-7 I open. Again, this is going super into the weeds, but the reason for that would be, for me, and it's something that you see in pre-flop chats sometimes with 7-8 finding more fault, is on a flop of 9-10 jack, if villain has a lot of king queen in his range, then we're just going to be faced with a hand that continues and is very often dominated. Where if we have a hand like 4-5 suited, the times that it comes 6-7-8, we're not expecting this villain to have a lot of 9-10 suited, right?
Yeah.
And so, even the times when it comes like, ace 5-4 or something, villain isn't going to have 3-2. He's going to have a lot of top pair, and with 4-5, we're going to be able to stack that top pair, right? So yeah, I think if it is a spot like this where it is really close, whether we want to continue or whether we want to fold, always just try to make the best decision. And for me, that would be continuing something like 4-5 suited or 5-6 suited in favor of 7-8 suited.
Yeah, I agree. Again, to highlight this, I think if this was 11.5, it would be, I would lean way more towards the fold. If he makes it 10 big blinds, to be honest, against his tendencies and range and so on, I think this hand is just pretty different.
Yeah, and we are going to be able to overrealize. So if we do continue here, we should be able to put villain in some tough spots, maybe. So if we got any thoughts here on flop?
He goes for a check.
Okay, so he says on the flop. Okay, I don't think his thoughts line up here. Maybe it's better to fold. On the flop, I need to call 1/3 with gut shot and back flip or flush shot. Yeah, so these notes don't make sense to this hand. So villain out of position checks, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll work through this hand then ourselves. What
Um,
are your thoughts?
my thoughts are that, I think usually we want to have some kind of equity to bluff here. I think, especially from under the gun, we are. So, what happens in these spots is often we don't want to bet high equity hands because we're afraid of getting check raised. I don't think this opponent is the type to check raise very often, particularly on a king high board. And I think it's also very difficult to have absolutely no equity and also unblocks villain call folds or check folds or so on. So I actually think I do like a bet with this hand. I don't think I think it has nice blockers. I expect the guy to be relatively straightforward here. And yeah, maybe he's gonna have some traps like kings, some aces, tens, so on. I think he's mostly gonna have hands like queens, jacks. Um, Not sure, ace queen, ace jack, maybe he bats those, but overall I think this is quite a good hand to start stabbing and assume he's going to be relatively face up. That being said, I don't think checking is terrible either, but I think I do prefer batting. Although, yeah, our batting frequency here is going to be quite low. I think this is a nice hand to mix in. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with all of your points. I think this hand in particular, I don't mind betting. I don't mind checking. One thing I would say is that if we bet this flop, I would expect villain to continue a bunch on the flop, and so we might have to continue betting on turns or rivers. But if we check here on some turns, when we bet, villain is going to be less incentivized to call because hands like gut shots, which you can have a lot of, those ace jacks, ace queens. Um, are probably not able to continue as often. So I think against someone who's quite passive, I might lean in the direction of checking this and then being a lot, very aggressive on turns that I think he's gonna have a lot of his range folding, and versus check on the flop and check on the turn, he's obviously gonna filter his range as well to down to be one of the weakest portions of his range.
Yeah, I think I agree. Let's see what hero did here. Went for a
Okay,
check
so
back. And on the turn, our villain goes for a half pot delayed c-bet. Alright, my thoughts here is that I'm obviously not super happy seeing this, but against a half pot, we only need to be good 25% of the times in order to call. Even if we're not good here, we still have equity against almost everything. We have a pair, we are drawing to two pair, we have an out to a straight, we can river trips. And I think even though he's passive, he's also going to have a few bluffs here, something like, I don't know, random ace-x of hearts that he 3-bet, maybe something like ace-queen, ace-jack that he didn't bet on the flop. So I think this is quite a standard call. I don't see anything else to do here. What about you?
yeah, as someone in the chat, Martin said that could have a high frequency of queens, pocket queens here. I think that is. I think yeah, you can often see these pairs against this spot with pocket queens. They check flop and they go for a bet on the turn. Yeah, versus this size bet, I think it's close. I still think it's close because a lot of their betting range are gonna have a lot of cards that just really improve them. So something like Ace Queen has Ace X Queen X Jack X. Something like Queen Jack is sometimes going to be a disaster if the river's a 9, and we get straight over straight. Yeah, I think it's really close. I think we should call, given that we can get this guy to fold a lot on rivers. But I'm yeah, not really loving life at this point either.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure how much of a concern something like Queen Jack is here against this kind of opponent betting big blind against MP. I think they're rarely gonna have that kind of hand, but yeah, I agree with your thoughts. We call, and the river is a queen of hearts. Villain goes for a check.
Well, let's hope they haven't got queens now, because I guess the way the note got set up, I guess we're gonna do something aggressive here versus check. Do we get to see before we talk about it, or do we want to talk about it?
I checked.
Okay. Yeah. So I think just trying to, range villain from flop, turn, and river. I think villain can potentially have three combos of queen jack suited, can potentially have 12 combos of ace queen. They're not going to have as many combos of ace jack. It's probably only going to be the suited version. Even in the ace queen, they're probably not going to three bet all of their ace queen off. So
If
yeah,
any, no, I don't think he's gonna three bet almost any ace queen off. Like this guy with 7% three bet in these positions, and I think queen jack also three combos. That's a lot because if you think about it, that means he's three betting all the suited combos, and then he's never betting the flop, and he's always delay c betting them. So I think
yeah,
that's quite
it
ambitious.
obviously does get filtered through pre-flop, flop to river. So yeah, he's not going to have three combos. You're right. And yeah, the same with ace queen. Actually, I think you're right. Given the positions, given the opponent, which is something I wasn't thinking of. There is, yeah, they probably don't have all that many combinations of ace queen off to begin with, and then again, it's got to find its way to the river in this line. Um, yeah, to be honest, I'm really unsure in this spot. I don't think we have any showdown. I don't think our hand is too relevant in any way. I don't think villain's gonna ever have something like pocket sevens. Um,
I
I
think
don't think
the
villain.
reason why it might be a bit relevant is that at least we unblock folds.
Yeah, we do unblock folds. And again, villain has decided to check flop, bet 50% on turn, check river. So again, he's led himself into a position where he has one of the weaker portions of his range as well. So I wouldn't hate going for a bluff here. We do unblock a lot of folds. We unblock a lot of one pair hands as well. As we said, those ace queens, maybe some ace 10 suited. The queen is good in that it means he has less pocket queens as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually think this is quite a mandatory bluff almost. Because first of all, like out of position isn't. I don't think they're protecting the range enough. I don't think they're gonna check here with the flash enough. Maybe it's not thin value betting, so yeah, he's gonna have two pairs and some sets. But overall, I think his range is going to be mostly aces, ace king, and a lot of opponents are gonna have a very tough time calling those hands here. Um, and if we think, let's say we have no idea if he overfolds or overcalls, and we are trying to play, close to GTO, I think it's so difficult to get here with a hand that has worse showdown because, like, yeah, we check back flop, he delayed c bet. There are a few hands, but not that many. So yeah, I think this is very close to the bottom of our range. Has good unblockers, although not great blockers. I think it's just a good bluff overall.
Yeah, I do think it could be a really good bluff. One thing I would just say for our hero is, you've obviously got a lot of stats on, right? Because you gave us his one-man solve flop. But in this hand, I think it's just way more important to know what his winter showdown is because he potentially has, if he has a really high winter showdown, which means he's calling a lot. He potentially has a lot of call downs here. Maybe he's got all of the ace king in his range, and maybe he always calls with ace king in his range. So I think if we've got the one stat, we have to be aware of what the other stat is telling us as well.
Yeah, it's just here I would not really look at when to showdown because I think for a player who has 39 winners of flop, that's going to be very, very skewed. Because even if he has a big, like a high one to showdown, it could probably mean that he's giving up so often on bluffs that he should make on the river that he's just getting to showdown. Checking back, no showdown hands in every spot, not bluffing when he should. And I think that could really skew his one to showdown. So for these kind of players, I don't think if you see like 33, 34, there's necessarily an indicator that he's calling wide. So I'd rather
No,
look for stats like call river or stats like that to put this together.
yeah, I agree with you. But again, right, we saw the winter showdown and it was 28, and we just always bluff here, right? Because
Yeah.
he's not only just like not value betting himself, he's also just getting to the range and folding a bunch, right? So that would indicate his ace kings, his ace queens, his king jacks, just getting to this river and just always folding. I'm not saying if it's always just really high, he's always calling all of those hands, it can often mean the opposite as well, right? If it's really low, he's just got to fold way too often as well as being passive.
Yeah, I agree with that. Makes sense. But here he checks back and we see aces. Really curious what he would do with this hand. Do you expect a fold?
It's interesting. Like again, I without knowing villain stats, I'm not sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um,
We have one more hand apparently.
Okay, we'll try and maybe we should try and rush through this one. The viewer count is dropped, and we've been going for 2.5 hours. So yeah, let's.
Okay, we can
I
just
thought
end it
our
here.
last one was going to be our last hand.
Alright then, let's just wrap it up here.
Okay, perfect.
Well, thanks everyone.
Sorry guys, if you want to see what happened with that Queen's hand, but if you do, then yeah, get on to Run It Once and tell them that you like this session, and hopefully we can run some more of them in the future. And if we do, and you guys want to get involved by sending in your hands, you can do so in the Run It Once Discord, you can do it in our Discord, or you can also do it on a thread that we created on Run It Once website. That's probably the best place to go because, you guys now have access to all the essential content for a week. And yeah, I guess you can post it in the forums as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Any last thoughts, Alex?
No, the same thing. Thanks everyone for joining. I really hope you got something out of this session that you can implement in your games. And yeah, if you liked it, let us know, and hopefully we can run some more of this in the future.
Yeah, last thing I'd just like to say as well is thanks to everyone who did submit hands and for giving us their thought process as well. It's not always easy to be put in the spotlight and have people dissect your hands, but it's going to be a really good way of learning from your mistakes, and yeah, getting feedback from people is really good.
Alright, thanks. Bye everyone.
Thanks,